Cold weather, skyrocketing spot rates. Today on Data Day. You know, interesting, Dean. We're about to get rain tomorrow. We're getting a snowstorm now, and then we're going to get rain tomorrow, and it's supposed to be mild for the next couple of days, which is going to create a gong show on our roads. I'll tell you that right now. I'm calling it. Tomorrow morning, there's going to be like 9 accidents every 4 minutes on the 400 series highways across Ontario. I know it. There's the days like this when I used to work in the city, I would never go to work. I would never go to work because I said, you know what? I am not spending 7 hours in traffic on the days of snowstorms just to go to work and work for 3 hours. I may as well work from home. So for all y'all out there for this beautiful Data Day Wednesday, I hope y'all made it to work okay this morning. If you're still on the road, just sit back, relax, and enjoy Data Day with Diener and Jeff. Dean, how's Australia?
Benign when it comes to weather. There's nothing happening here other than, you know, the usual rain and heat and humidity. It's America's one of the few countries where weather is such a big factor. It sort of oscillates between spring, an American spring, and summer here. Like that's kind of it. Weather doesn't impact freight at all here. I mean, with some, you know, there's a cyclone off the East Coast and that may cause some flooding, but weather is such a big deal in the United States. I mean, if you include, I don't know much about the Mexican market, but certainly North American, when you include Canada, it's a huge issue. We had Chuck Snow on our show yesterday, and he was talking about the impact on the Canadian market. It's significant. They've got a lot of cold over there, but a lot of their freight is confined to 2 provinces. But unlike the US, we saw, when I looked at all the data over the weekend, almost every market, the volume of loads moving dropped and rates went up, which of course that shouldn't surprise anybody. I think it did. I was watching some Reddit chats from some freight brokers over the weekend, and they were complaining a lot about carriers asking for $2,000 for a 500-mile haul. And I thought, that's cheap. That's cheap.
It's very cheap, actually.
Yeah, and the point was they were asking, you know, what they thought was too much money, and I thought, yeah, but the trip's going to take twice as long. So you're under a 500-mile load for 2 days in icy, cold, snowy weather. You're still under your revenue per truck day target of $1,200 a day. So it's actually it's a real dichotomy for a lot of carriers, because when you base your rates on normal road speed in normal conditions, suddenly when cold weather hits like this, everything changes. And it wasn't like we had a sudden decrease in demand or increase in demand. The whole network slowed down. Very similar to how the network slowed down during the pandemic when we couldn't get trucks off loading docks because there weren't enough workers in warehouses. The whole velocity of the freight network slows, and it creates the illusion that capacity is tight or tighter or tightening. And that's not the case. So this storm is entering its second week. I think it's the second week, unless I'm mistaken. And it's still not over yet.
Warmer weather coming, but I mean, last week in parts of like along the Trans-Canada Highway in like Manitoba and Saskatchewan and Alberta, it was minus 56, which for all of you in the US would probably be 0 to -2 to -4, maybe, because I think 35 is freezing, right? 36 is freezing in the US.
Yep. They align once you get down to those temps down. I think they're pretty much the same, Celsius and Fahrenheit.
Well, I mean, I was speaking to a lot of people and stuff that they would normally send. So perfect example is laundry detergent. Normally laundry detergent, because of the additives in it and everything, it doesn't freeze.
Right.
And there was truckloads of Arctic ice or whatever it is showing up frozen solid just from driving through the provinces. So you got to think, right? Because a lot of the times when it comes to this weather, a lot of products won't freeze because of the constant movement in the truck when they're, especially when they're running teams, right? It's always moving. So there's always kind of that flow. Stuff's arriving frozen. Like, I mean, you could probably run frozen fish in a dry van and you'll make it. There'll be no issues with claims. I mean, none.
Yeah, you know, with plastic too. The plastic, if it gets cold enough, it cracks.
Yeah.
Well, and then you
So
think about the unloading of it, right? All
Absolutely.
you do is touch it with
Touch
the
it, and
forklift,
it
and it shatters.
shatters. Yep.
So nationally, refrigerated made the most movement last week in terms of rate and volume movement. Nationally, reefer loads, the volume of loads moving. So let's be clear, this isn't load posts on a load board. This is the volume of actual loads moving. Nationally, it was down 10% last week over week, and rates are up 1.3% week over week. In dry van, volume of loads down 13%, rates up 1.1%. Flatbed, rates up about 1%, but the loads moved were down 26%. And of course, thing with open deck in freezing temps takes a lot longer. It's just a much harder. I mean, it's a smaller part of the market, but it's a much smaller segment in terms of the volume of freight moved. But I think it's impacted the most because straps freeze, tarps freeze, everything freezes. Like even before I left home, we had a cold snap in Boston, and I've got a leak in the back of my sleeper cab that I haven't been able to find, and some water got in with the rain, and then it froze. All my cleaning rags were frozen solid in the back of the sleeper cab underneath. So just as an example, so much stuff freezes in and around your truck when it gets cold like this for flatbedders.
Yeah, you know
Including
something.
the truck
Another thing
itself.
too is about gelling. I mean, when drivers,
Yep.
that happens, and it could crack hoses. If you're not taking care of your truck and maintaining it the way it should be, you got serious problems when the temperatures drop.
Well, I think, Jeff, a lot of guys got caught by this week. If I use my trusty source of social media, you see a lot of guys who didn't put additives in. I put additives. Yes, it's the most reliable source. If it's on the internet, it's got to be true. But pictures don't lie. Although in this world of deep fake, you could say that pictures might be lying. But when I look at pictures of drivers with frozen filters, so one of the things that happens if you don't put gelling agents in the diesel, the water content in diesel, and it's always there. If you don't put the additive in that removes the water, that water freezes in your filters. And your filters block. And I saw a bunch of guys getting caught out because they hadn't treated it, because if you followed the weather temps, we'd had a fairly warm winter, especially in New England up until New Year. So yes, the wheels fell off a lot of freight hauls this week. Some of the individual data points, I thought the Pacific Northwest got hit the hardest. When I look at the data, they had heavy snowfall, significant ice accumulations. There were reports of up to half an inch of ice in Oregon, Eugene, Oregon, Portland, Vancouver, Washington. Vancouver, Washington had ice accumulations up to 1/4 of an inch to 3/4 of an inch. The volume of loads moving up in the Pacific Northwest, loads moved dropped 13%, rates are up 3%. In the Midwest, Missouri market for dry van, volume of loads moving dropped 14%, spot rates are up 2 cents. Kansas City to Chicago, rates were up, rates are up and volumes are down. Even outbound Chicago rates are up 7 cents a mile, averaging 212 last week, and the volume of loads was 17% lower. So there was some significant movement in some big markets like flatbed. If you look at flatbed market, I was kind of shocked by some of these numbers. Flatbed in Houston, the rates in Houston increased. So this is the largest spot market for flatbed in Houston. Rates up 2%, but the volume of loads moving plunged by 33% in the biggest spot market in the country. So things really just came to a grinding halt. But I think refrigerated carriers made the most out of the week. As you said at the top of the show, when shippers add protect from freeze to bills of lading, you start to see the market, move significantly. The biggest movement in reefer that we saw in sort of large swaths of the country was Pacific Northwest, obviously because of what we just spoke about with rates and volumes. But if you look at the Pacific Northwest, outbound reefer rates jumped 22 cents a mile in the region. They averaged $2.49 last week. In Washington State, spot rates are up 11%, volume of loads down 6%. So really familiar story. I think one of the hardest hit areas in terms of states as opposed to regions was Nebraska, right in the middle of where all that cold hit. And reefer line haul rates jumped 37 cents a mile last week. The average was almost $3 a mile, excluding fuel, out of Omaha. Volumes of loads moving out of Omaha, which is sort of in the epicenter of the meat patch, volume of loads was down 31%, rates up 15%. Loads from Omaha to Chicago at 309. That's almost $1 a mile lower, though, than the surge during the 2021 polar vortex. So we're not back to polar vortex level rate surges. And as we speak, Jeff's frozen after all of those. Oh, he's back. You froze, Jeff. Maybe it's my connection.
I don't know. You froze. I mean,
oh,
yeah. And then
well, you both froze. Okay.
It's not me, it's you.
So just so everybody watching and listening, Jeff was raving about his new internet. And I said, it's the second time he's talked about it. I bet you.
Idea.
I bet you it's going out. Well, you know what?
Hey, here's
the thing. I mean, you got to giggle, right? Dean's at a McDonald's last week in Australia, and his internet is bingo, bang on. And Jeff's at his house and his internet. Oh no, your power went out. Never mind. I apologize, everyone. I apologize. Jeff's power went out last week. Dean and I were giggling because we're like, how is that possible? He's on the other side of the earth. And he's got great Wi-Fi at McDonald's.
Yeah. You know something to just to follow up. Southern California, especially around San Diego, man, did they get hit with rain, more rain than they've ever had before. So Southern California outbound, I think, is going to struggle a little bit because they're underwater, man. They're underwater. Bad.
Yeah, they've got they're gearing up for icy conditions. Well, I mean, it's Northern Cal. They're talking about icy conditions already on top of that rain. So I was just reading a Mansfield Energy report. So yeah, this is sort of still dragging on. What are we, Wednesday, and it's still going on. So this will disrupt freight markets. I suspect on our show yesterday, Ken talked about the short-term forecast, and we're seeing when we look at our 3-day rates, we're seeing a lot of he called it atypical strength in the dry van market. And I thought that was really interesting because our 3-day rates are going up. Now, what we don't know is whether that's purely weather induced or whether there is a noticeable change in capacity. What I will say is that we talked about this before Christmas, that the end of the year was going to be a pivotal time for carriers because you've got end of quarterly tax due, you've got a lot, insurance renewals are due on 12/31. There's a bunch of things that happen at the end of the year. Chris Visser came out with his JD Power report on the number of trucks at auction in December, and it was as high, it spiked, and it was as high as it was in June of 2020. So remember, when you look at the number of Class 8 trucks at auction, which I take as a proxy for small fleet owner-operator supply, it spiked in June of 2020, just as the pandemic wiped out a lot of capacity. So in December just gone, it was back to almost the same level. So it tells me that even when I look at the FMCSA authority data, we're still seeing that exodus of capacity. But from the number of trucks at auction, it certainly peaked at the end of last year. And at some point, we have to get to a stage where there's just less capacity in the market. I don't know that the weather will change. The carriers that are still in the industry are still going to look for higher rates to get by. But I think that we're starting to see the impacts of that exodus of capacity start to bite. In particular, I think in flatbed. Because, and I'd love to get you guys' take on this, because flatbed's highly specialized. And I think a lot of the growth we saw during the pandemic was mostly dry van. Right? And I think so. We had a lot of power only, a lot of dry van carriers entered the market. I think a lot of exited. And the more specialized you get around refrigeration and open deck, I think you had fewer carriers coming into the industry and fewer leaving. I think the volatility in that market's been a lot flatter. And that's why I think those rates have been more stable, but we could see a bigger change in the dry van market, because I think that's where most of the capacity is leaving the industry, as opposed to the flatbed guys who invested in equipment, got all their, their dunnage, their chains, their straps, all of that sort of stuff. So that's sort of my take on where the market's at right now.
So did the long haul carriers exited faster than the short haul?
Sure. Oh, definitely.
We talked about that. Yeah, because we talked about that over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, how much of a percent did they drop from the last time we discussed?
We don't know, Jeff. That's the thing. We all I know is that when I look at the number of carriers that are entering and leaving the industry, 8 in 10 are load board customers. Right, so we could track the MC numbers and the DAT numbers from DAT customers to those entering and leaving. We know that 80% of those leaving are coming and going. But for every 10 that leave, there's 8 new ones coming back in. And I have to believe that they're not coming back into the long haul segment. That would be crazy in this
short
market.
haul, local P&D, and that kind of stuff.
And when I talk to some of the experts,
you talk about flatbeds. One of my larger customers averages probably between 3 facilities, close to 400 loads a day. He's down to maybe 6. And it's all to do with brick, and it's all to do with and they're North American wide. And when I'm asking the questions, he's saying, Dan, it's not really, it was raw material. And he goes, and now what's happening is people are just canceling orders. They're saying, hold on to it. I'm not ready for it for 3, 4, 5 months. And I think and in this particular situation, I shouldn't say I think, in this particular situation, it all goes back to the housing market, all of it, because that's where the majority of their bricks are. Obviously, the second portion of their business is like patio stones and that kind of stuff. Not very many people doing their patios. We got 4 feet of snow outside and it's minus 20. You're not doing your patio, right? But we're seeing from the customers I have is all I can speak to on this, Dean. But I'll tell you right now, the housing market and the interest rates and all these other geopolitical things happening are totally interfering. And actually just got a call from him this morning saying he's got 6 more drivers that just quit. Do I know any customers that are looking to move flatbeds? Any product on flatbeds? He goes, Dan, they will take anything. Like even if they have to load pallets and drive them back. He goes, just anything you can do to help me. So he's actually reaching out to all of his contacts to help his suppliers stick around, because they're like, I can't do this for much longer. Right. Especially in the flatbed market. You got to understand, right? Like this is twice as much as dry van equipment, these flatbed equipment. And if you're not making any money, it's a tough go, man.
The housing starts came out. I don't think we covered it last week, but the volume of single family housing in December was down almost 9% month over month. It's up about 16% compared to this time last year. The encouraging news was permits for future dwellings were up 2% month over month. There's a little bit of a sign of resiliency there in the market, but to give you put some context around why flatbed is so quiet. Think about the Permian Basin and the Bacon up in the Dakotas. We are producing oil. Oil rigs are producing at record levels, but we've got fewer drilling rigs, right? So if you think about the number of drilling rigs, about half of them are in the Permian Basin. The Baker Hughes rig count is down 30% from 4 years ago and 20% from this time last year, but we're drilling more oil, so the wells are more productive. But if you've got 20% fewer drilling rigs for gas and oil in the oil industry, you've got less flatbed loads of drill pipe and casing and all of the other things that go with it. So when you look at the Texas market, for example, flatbed volume from Houston to Lubbock in the Permian Basin, load volumes down about 2%, plenty of capacity. Rates have steadily declined over that period. They're down 40 cents a mile over the last year. So what's happening is you've got fewer oil rigs being built, you've got fewer homes being built. So you've just naturally got less volume in the market. But I think when you look at the rates in flatbed, they're fairly flat. Like they're very stable, unlike dry van and reefer. It's a fairly flat market right now.
Something, we're talking about the housing market. How about the commercial warehousing market? How does that look? Do you have any data on that?
I could probably pull something up while we're talking. The Fred database has some interesting data points there. I'll see if I can pull it up. What I had read.
When you think about it, I mean, that's heavy duty flatbed movement.
Huge, yeah.
I mean, when you think about brick and mortar and the slabs, all the steel, the metal girders, all of that kind of stuff. I just heard and read a few things that they were starting to back off a little bit, but how much?
Well, they have. So the latest data, and sorry, guys.
Go ahead, Dean. Go.
Well, the latest data in the Fred database, I've just pulled it up now. Total construction spending for non-residential. Jeff, to your point, it peaked in October at, I'm going to say this is 1.142 billion. It came off in November to probably down about 3 or 4%. So the peak, what you should note is from when the pandemic hit, it went from 838 billion to almost 1,200, 1.2 billion. So that might be trillion. Anyway, so we've seen fairly flat all the way up until from 2019 to 2021, and then it's accelerated. It looks like it's up about 30% to October from when the pandemic started. So this is the warehouse construction you're getting at, Jeff.
Yep.
And I think we talked about this a little while ago, maybe middle of last year, that at some point that we had to have enough warehouses and that non-residential construction boom would slow down. It slowed down in November. So I haven't seen the December data come out yet, but it is certainly coming off, but not at a big clip.
I'm just curious. The reason why I asked that is because of the increase in Houston area. We talked about that, right? You talked about New Jersey, New York ports as well. And people were struggling, looking for warehouse space, and people were, gobbling up vacant lots and stuff to build and erect these warehouses to put inventory in it. I'm just curious if we're over that bump now, since now a majority of that freight is now going back to LA, right? And Long Beach. You're starting to see an uptick over there. Houston is dropping a little bit as well. Savannah too. So I'm just curious. That's why I'm asking, because there was a lot of movement going in those areas, as you well know, when everything was booming and a lot of freight was coming in.
Well, I can tell you just on the 410 South and, some of the 400 series highways in Ontario, some of the largest warehouses I've ever seen all have for lease signs.
Right.
Like it's, and I think, and again, if somebody's out there that has the data, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the warehousing market has really cooled off because shippers have less inventory that they're stocking. They've done all the sellouts, they've done all the blowouts, they've done all this stuff, and they're being smarter about outside warehouses. Like I know one gentleman got 9 different warehouses in Ontario and called him on Thursday last week and said, hey, listen, probably because every time I called him, I'm like, do you have literally 10 square feet I can get? Nope, I'm packed. I said, I'm probably shooting in the dark, but do you have any square footage? He goes, yeah, I got about 75, 80,000 available. And I was like, you didn't have 10 square feet 60 days ago. He goes, oh no, mass exodus. He goes, company. And I said, everything okay? Thinking, he says, oh, no, it's nothing to do with us. He says, it's companies tightening up their wallets, companies bringing stuff in-house, getting rid of outside warehouses. I've often talked about Greg and Jeff, Greg.
Oh yeah.
Where overnight it seemed like, he says, like, Dan, it feels like overnight I had 1.36 million square feet of outside warehouse space.
Right.
What does that do to your logistics budget? What does that do to your transportation budget? He goes, like, completely blows it out of the park, because on average, call it $2 a square foot. Some were $3, some were $1.50, depending on where he was, how much the space was needed. He goes, so call it $2 a square foot. I'm now over $3 million a month in additional spend for logistics.
Wow.
Don't know about you guys, but not very many companies, probably besides Amazon, can spend an extra $3 million a month and still make money on freight.
Well, let's go back to our discussion several months ago, and Dean definitely has passed this, but exit 8A on the Jersey Turnpike in Cranberry, that place has been booming for 15, 20 years. I mean, they were buying up farmlands and erecting warehouses and DCs faster than you can snap your fingers, and a lot of them were just, open spaces, just 100-door, 200-door facilities, always for lease. So, I think Prologis had a lot to do with that. But what's interesting, and we've had this conversation again several months ago, Prologis, the largest warehouse developer in the world, at 900, I think it, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it was 964 million square feet, and they were out of capacity. They couldn't do it. They sent notes out to their customers saying, you know what, we can't take. I wonder what that capacity is for them right now from way back when, because they're the world's largest warehouser.
So, Jeff, one of the data points we talked about ages ago was Fort Worth, right? Because when I was in Fort Worth, I saw a lot of development. So I just pulled up the data for Fort Worth now. This is dry van Fort Worth volumes. Loads moved, not loads posted, are down 5% year over year. Rates are down 4%. If I go to the Dallas market, which is next door, volume of loads are down 4% year over year. Rates are down 5% year over year. And in Houston, the volume of loads are down 15%, Jeff, in Houston. So that's dry van. I could click on flatbed, and flatbed's probably going to show a similar story. Oh, flatbed volumes are down. Oh my God. In Houston, flatbed total volumes are down 36% year over year. Rates are down 10%. So there's a, and I emailed the chart to Dan. I don't know if you can pop it up, but it's the long-term construction spend for non-residential construction, and it puts into perspective this massive spending and then the tailing off in the construction of warehouses, which has driven a lot of demand for open deck specialized permit loads, prefab concrete. Think about all the machinery that's been moving to develop land. So a lot of that is starting to slow down and cool off now. And this chart.
Do a data point for LAX and Long Beach.
Let me pull that up.
Now that we're seeing an uptick over there, I wonder if you go back like 8 months, maybe 9 months, take a snapshot of that and where we are now.
Yeah, so outbound Los Angeles dry van, that's interesting, Jeff. You're very perceptive, up 4% year over year, right? But rates are down 8% year over year, outbound Los Angeles. So that speaks to the excess capacity in that market nationally and in that, but volume of loads are up. There's no question about that. That's a very interesting data point. Up year over year, but down 8% in the last month. So there's a little bit of fluctuation around there. I mean, one of the biggest markets that's probably worth talking about is the big distribution market in Atlanta. Yes. Volume of loads, outbound loads are down 6%, rates down 9% in that market. And I think the other big market that we watch is Chicago. Volume of loads are down 8%, rates down 3%. So a familiar trend across most of the country. How about
Eastern Pennsylvania?
Wow. Okay. Now we're getting deep. EPA.
Like Bethlehem, Allentown.
I've got the biggest market for us is Allentown, and the volume of loads are down 8% year over year. Rates are down 8% year over year.
How about Breggettsville? That's huge.
Which one?
Breggettsville, PA.
I wonder which market that's in. Is it in the Harrisburg market?
Yeah, I think that would be the Harrisburg market over there.
Yep.
Because that's a big warehousing.
Yep. Down, volume of loads are down 10% year over year. Rates are down 9% year over year. So remember, when I say, just for those listening, when I talk about the volume of loads, this is the actual loads moving, not loads posted. Right? There's a big difference between the two, because the same load can be posted multiple times on a load board. I like to look at the volume of loads moving, because that's where we get our contribution data from. We get our rates from carriers that move loads and brokers that move loads. There's a difference.
Wow.
Were you able to get that chart, Dan, on the construction spend? He's quiet.
I'm wondering why you guys can't hear me. I'm on mute. That'll be real why. It still hasn't come through, Dean.
Okay. All right. It's a long way. It's like 15,000
Do you have Jeff
miles.
internet over there in Australia or what?
Yeah. Hold on, let me stop myself with water on that. That was a big
ting, ting, ting. That was a good one. Yeah. That flowed, man. That flowed. No, I don't see it. So maybe
no problem. So you could picture not quite a roller coaster, but you could picture non-residential spending in warehouse construction primarily fairly flat. Of course, this has been impacted by the infrastructure spending. There's been a lot of private spending going on. But I think a lot of it in trucking was generated by this warehousing boom that we all saw along the highways as we traveled around the country, whether it be Houston, Fort Worth, Pennsylvania. And it jumped. I just pulled the numbers from when the pandemic started, well, probably the latter part of 2020. The amount of spending increased 36% until October last year, and it's dropped about 1% since October, right? So it's starting to cool off, but it's not crashing.
Right.
So I think, but as Jeff has said on the show a number of times, a lot of this spending, this takes a long time for these projects to start and finish. So there'll be a long tail on this, but it certainly looks like that boom in construction spending has started to slow down, which is why the flatbed market had so much strength, because residential housing was down, but it was offset by commercial construction.
Yep.
Over that period.
And that makes sense.
Stuff. Yeah. Yep.
Excellent. So what do we got coming up this week, Dean? You're back in a couple of weeks still, right? Or when?
Yeah, back a couple of weeks. Yep. I'm February the 13th. A good friend of mine who's done 9 million miles over a 50-year career. I'm going out to have breakfast with him now. He's driven 1,000 miles to have breakfast with me. He's
coming 1,000 miles to have breakfast with you?
Yeah. He's driven from far north Queensland.
Friend. That's a friend.
So here's a guy that ran B triples with 40 pallets of bananas cross country twice a month in his own B triple. So 3 trailers, Big Mac. These sort of guys, if you could bottle what they've got and teach it to other people, they make it look so easy. So to get in the vehicle, East car, and
him on
just make sure you buy him breakfast, Dean. Jesus,
I am. We could do that.
Is it possible that we can schedule, even if we have to pre-record, can we schedule a time? Imagine the knowledge that we'd be able to glean from a guy that's done over 9 million miles.
How many people do you know that does that?
I have not heard of one.
I don't.
I'm sure there is. Don't get me wrong. Don't everybody chop my head off.
No,
but I have not heard of one. Like 1 million miles is kind of like, holy shit.
I'm going to ask him one question. I'm going to do some YouTube videos this morning, and I'm going to ask him a question. What would you tell a young Bob McMillan 50 years ago as you were starting out in trucking? What would you tell him today? I can't wait for that answer. Yeah.
And Dean, if you can record it, so even if he's not available, we'll piece it together and send you the video.
Let's do that
together, because that is like gold, massive knowledge.
No, that's not gold. That's
even just for salespeople to understand the mindset, to understand what this like 9 million miles.
That's a whole different mindset right there. That's not a regular truck driver mindset. I'll tell you that.
No.
Oh, no.
Awesome. That's good to hear.
It is.
So next week on our show next Tuesday, we've got Evan Shelley talking about truck parking. They've got a very interesting take on solving the truck parking problem on our Freightvine podcast. Really interesting discussion with a guy talking about providing fast charging depots for the drayage community in California. So they're trying to figure out a way to provide the infrastructure for the drayage community in California. I can't wait to hear that one. That's going to be a very interesting discussion. Yeah.
Makes sense. So, you know what? If there's any company that's going to do it, I bet you it's Tesla.
Right.
100%. 100%. And of course, it'll do just like Tesla started with cars. California was the main market. I don't know if you guys remember 2005, I think the first Roadster came out, because I remember guys like Mike Fasalme and some digital marketers had an electric sports car, and it looked just like the Roadster. Tesla was brand new, and literally anywhere outside of California there was no charging stations. It was all California. So I wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if that starts getting built, and within the next 24 months it's literally the rage out in California to be electric vehicles for drayage. Right?
You know what? I remember when Tesla started, and you'll remember this as well. Remember how many vehicles were parked for years in warehouses because they didn't sell? They just sat there.
Well, also, I don't know if you guys have seen some of the biographies and stuff, but Tesla, the way they did it is they ran out of money, and then so what they did is they built another model and sold pre-orders to finance the building of the Model S.
Yep.
Like, it's actually a very smart way of doing it. So the Model Y, was it the Y? Yeah, the Model Y, I think, came out before the Model 3, if I remember correctly. So the Model Y got released as like a lower price car, and that funded all of the high priced Model S's and Roadsters. And it was actually just, the way Elon did it was pretty cool. But we'll get into that on another show.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Dean,
guys.
all the way from Australia. Internet worked all this week. We are golden. We'll see y'all tomorrow.